So good morning and welcome back to the communication, the communications of practice. That's not what it's called. It's the community of practice on autism spectrum disorder and other developmental disabilities. And we're talking all about communication today, communicating about communicating. And so I am really excited today. Our last speakers include Abygail Marx, who's a speech language pathologist at the Communication Aids and Systems Clinic at the University of Wisconsin-Weisman Center, also known as CASC. We have Stasia Wilson, who is a Lend peer mentor. She is an artist, and be careful, she has a wicked sense of humor. So just so you know, they both love life, and I enjoy both of them, and I am looking forward to what they have to teach us today about communication and technology. Abby and Stasia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim, for having us and everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We have some slides to share with you, and in those slides, there are some resources. So there is a link in the chat. Whoops, maybe it didn't work. There is a link in the chat to those slides if you want to download a copy, and then I'll also share them with Tim to send out to the group after as well. So we'll go ahead and get this started. Okay, do you guys just see the slide? You don't see the presenter view?
Correct, we have the slides.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we're going to be talking today. I'm really excited to be presenting with my colleague and friend, Stasia. We're going to go through some information about communication and technology. So I'll start by sharing just some basics about AAC that many of you probably know, but we'll just kind of zip through them quickly in case there's anyone on the call who isn't very familiar with AAC and wants some background about what that is. And then Stasia will share about her lived experience as an AAC user. So it should be a fun little while chatting with you guys. So I'll give a brief introduction. Stasia, if it's okay, I'll introduce you now, and then you can introduce yourself later too. So Stasia is an individual who identifies as an artist, a self-advocate. She also works for the Lend program at Weisman Center as a peer mentor, and she is someone who uses AAC as her primary mode of communication. I am Abygail Marx, or Abby. As Tim said, I'm a speech language pathologist and an AAC specialist at the Weisman Center. So I work across our programs, supporting individuals who use AAC, their families, their teams, everyone around them. And then I also have a role in the Lend program as well, helping train future speech language pathologists and others across disciplines in AAC and communication. We did want to put a little disclaimer in here that we will talk about some different tools today, and there will be information about commercial websites for companies that make AAC tools and strategies. But we want to acknowledge neither of us are employed by any of those companies, and we're not promoting one brand or company over another. We're just we include some links to show examples and give you access to tools, but know that one of the most important things about using augmentative communication is having supports to feature match and figure out what types of tools and strategies are the best match for any individual. Okay, so to give a little bit of background, Stasia and I both work for the Weisman Center. This is a center that focuses on providing supports for individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities, and that support looks very differently across the whole building. There are people doing research, providing clinic, doing outreach and training, and creating resources and supports. And so we're really excited to be able to work in that environment and then also come out to groups like yours and help talk about and share information about the work that we do. So like I said, I'm going to start with just a little introduction to what AAC is, in case there's anybody on the call who isn't familiar with it or hasn't interacted with someone who uses AAC very much. So I'll go through this kind of quickly, but feel free to interrupt me if there are questions. So AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. And this is a lot of text, but I'll just kind of summarize the definition as we see AAC. And it really means any form of communication other than oral speech. So all of us use AAC in our daily lives. We don't only speak to each other. We use our facial expression, our gestures, we use our phones and email and other communication strategies as well. And then for individuals who maybe don't have speech or don't use speech as their primary mode, this can also mean supplemental aids like pictures and communication devices that help those individuals express themselves. I think it's important to think about who might use AAC, because often I think the primary population that people think of is this first circle where a person doesn't have speech and so they use AAC as their primary mode of communication. But I think it's important to know that anyone who can't meet all of their communication needs using speech alone may be appropriate for using AAC. So these other circles represent those areas. There may be somebody who, on this other far right side, there may be somebody who can primarily use speech as their mode of communication. But let's say later in the day, their speech gets harder to understand, or if they're in a really noisy environment, it's difficult to understand them. So they may use AAC as a backup to their speech to repair breakdowns when their speech isn't understood. And then these two circles in the middle represent somewhere in the middle of that. Maybe there's somebody who has some dysarthria, so very familiar people understand them and start to learn their speech patterns, but unfamiliar people have a hard time understanding them. And so they use AAC as a partner to their speech. So keep that in mind as you think about individuals who may benefit from AAC. Okay, now we'll zip through the different types of AAC, because I think it's important to know that this doesn't only mean those really high-tech devices. It can be a lot of different things. So one category we talk about is no tech, which means there's no technology involved. There's nothing outside of the individual's body that's needed for them to communicate. So this is, again, things that many of us use, things like our facial expression and our body posture, our language, body language. We also use nods and shakes of our heads to say yes and no. We might reach for things we want or point to things. And then using our hands, like I gesture a lot when I talk, and sometimes that's formalized into sign language or other types of language. So it's important to know there are augmentative communication strategies that don't involve anything outside of your body to use them. And Stasia will give some examples about each of these categories and the ways she uses AAC as well. So the next category is called light tech. Often in the past, it's been referred to as low tech, but there's been a shift in the field away from that language just to try to make sure people know that it's not low in the sense of being lower than another type of strategy. So we call it light tech instead now. This involves pictures and symbols, communication boards and books, things that don't necessarily have a battery or a voice output, but they do help individuals communicate by showing pictures or words. There are some examples on the slide here of different individual symbol cards, as well as some of the different kinds of books that can be created to help individuals communicate in this way. I'm just going to quickly open the chat so I can keep an eye on it too. Okay. The next category we'll talk about is mid-tech AAC, and this does typically have a battery and it does typically have a voice output, but it's not like a computer. So it doesn't have a dynamic screen that changes and new pictures come up and new options, come across the screen. It's something that's more static than that. So there are some examples on the top of a Big Mac and a step-by-step button, which can be recorded with messages, and then an individual can press the button for those messages to be spoken aloud. And overlay devices like the ones on the bottom, where you slide in a card that has pictures or words to represent what each button will say when it's pressed. Again, these buttons are typically recorded speech. So we often try to think about using a communication partner who would be of similar age and have a similar voice to do those recordings, so that these devices can be as representative as possible of the person who's using them. And then the final category, excuse me, that we'll talk about is high tech. So this is where we're talking about those computerized devices that typically have a dynamic screen. So as you touch particular things, or as you look at or activate particular things on the screen may change and it gives you more words and more vocabulary. These devices can be based on iPads and tablets, and they can also be what's called a dedicated communication device, which means its primary purpose is communication, and those are fundable through insurance. So for individuals who have a communication impairment or a speech difference that makes it that their speech doesn't meet all of their needs, they can qualify to have one of these devices purchased through their insurance, so they have access to it without having to pay out of pocket. Okay. And then the last little bit we'll talk about here is about alternative access. And I think this is important. Sorry if you can hear that. My dog is coughing in the background. Alternative access is important for individuals who maybe their hands, a lot of us can touch a screen, isolate a finger, point to things on a screen to activate them. But for many people, either their motor or their sensory skills aren't necessarily a match for that. Maybe seeing the icons on the screen is difficult, or hearing what it's saying to know what they're pushing, or using their finger to touch is difficult. And in those cases, there are lots of specialized equipment out there to help make sure that everyone has access to communication. So I think it's also important to know that even if you or a family member or a client you're working with doesn't have kind of typical motor patterns with being able to touch a screen of a device, that doesn't exclude them from using AAC. There are lots of strategies like key guards, which are these in the upper right, these kind of clear plastic overlays that can go over the screen just to help with accuracy of touching. You can use a stylus, which would be like a pen that you could point to the screen. And then there are alternative mouse options like trackpads, or they kind of look like, the joysticks kind of look like video game controllers. You can see one on the screen here. They're also very similar to the kinds of joysticks that are used to drive power wheelchairs. So those kinds of strategies can all be used to access communication devices as well. And then another access strategy that Stasia will demonstrate as she's talking with you all later is eye gaze. She controls her device using a camera that reads where she's looking to activate words and messages. And then a final option for alternative access is switch scanning. So for individuals who maybe eye gaze doesn't work well, but they can hit a switch with their hand or their head or their foot or their knee, we can set communication devices up to be accessed in those ways as well. Oops, sorry, clicking on the wrong spot. And then I think it's also important to know that AAC devices can do a lot more than just communication. These devices are, high powered computers, really. And so for individuals who, some of those individuals we were talking about who maybe their hands don't necessarily work to flip a light switch on and off, or to turn their music on their phone or on a radio, devices can be set up to control those kinds of things through infrared remote control. So similar to how the remote works for your TV, the devices have built-in technology that can communicate with other devices. You can use voice control to activate Alexa and Siri. I apologize as I say that if any of your machines go off right now. They can also be used for things like we said, environmental control, turning on and off lights, locking and unlocking doors, adjusting the heat in your home. And then one thing I think that's really important is the ability to use a communication device for written communication, because we know, especially after the pandemic, that we very frequently communicate with each other through email, or with your doctor through MyChart, or through social media posts. And so it's really important to have to create access to those kinds of communication as well. I think another cool thing that I'm learning more about recently is the option for communication devices to do translation. So if let's say you speak English, but you have caregivers who speak another language, you can compose messages in English on some of the communication devices, and then Google Translate is integrated in a way that it will translate that message into another language. So just some really cool things that are coming out to make communication systems as effective as possible. Okay, so we're going to move into kind of the meat of my portion of the presentation, and then I'll turn it over to Stasia. So Tim, when we were planning for this, Tim said people want to know what's new, what technologies out there, what are people doing with AAC right now? And so I've kind of focused in on some of the latest technology and strategies for communication, and I'm really happy to have questions and discussion around these things as well. The first area I wanted to touch on is video and visual scenes. Video and visual scenes have been a tool in AAC for many, many, many years, but recently there's been a lot of research on how these tools can be helpful to support communication in really naturalistic ways. So the difference between a video or a visual scene and kind of a traditional grid-based communication system, I think many people know about those devices where there's like, so many buttons on a page and each button says a different word or a different message. With a visual scene or a video scene, instead, as you can see in the picture on the left here, it's a photo of a kitchen, and you can see little boxes have been drawn. There's a red box over the refrigerator where they're adding a hotspot to talk about foods they might get out of the refrigerator. There's a hotspot over the microwave, which might have messages about, I want my food heated up, cook it longer, it's not warm enough. There's also a hotspot over the stool next to the counter, which could be used for things like, I want to sit here or I want to sit somewhere else. It could also include social messages, the kinds of things you chat about while you're sitting down for dinner. And so the idea behind these video and visual scenes is that for some individuals, it's really helpful to have more context than a grid gives you. So for somebody where it's hard to categorize, if you say, this is the button that takes you to foods, and then every button on this page is going to be a food, if somebody has difficulty with categorization, remembering that that category is where they're going to find all the words for food could be really difficult. But if they see a kitchen, that may, and this can even be their own kitchen. So you can take photos of actual, the person's actual environment. And so it may be far more digestible and contextual for them to see their kitchen and know every time we get the food, it comes out of the refrigerator. So touching the refrigerator is what's going to bring up those choices for what I want to eat. So there's a lot of research going on related to visual and video scenes. That's really cool and really interesting right now. The video visual scenes are adding a whole nother component too, where there can be video models of activities. So the example on the right here is a young man who's working in a coffee shop, and he's, helping the customer pay for what they're buying. But you can see along the left side of that right picture, there are also some other videos available. So this can be used to sequence job tasks. So the individual can watch the video, remember how they're supposed to do that job task. And then within that, there can be messages. So in the picture here, there's a blue circle over the little, whatever you'd call it for checking them out, the credit card machine. And so if the person touches on that credit card machine in the video, it brings up messages that you might say to the customer, like, it didn't accept it, can you try again? Or would you like to leave a tip? Or thank you so much, come again. And so you can really integrate lots of different technology to help support that individual to be as independent and participative and communicative within their job. So, or whatever environment they're in. So this is pretty cool. And like I said, the slides will be shared. So you'll be able to access these links. There's some information about different ways to use visual scenes, which are the ones that are pictures, and then video visual scenes, which are the ones that include videos. So they have information about the research that's being done, as well as links to where you can get to the different apps that you could use for creating these kinds of things. Okay. The next topic I want to talk about came up in some of the other talks earlier today. One really hot topic in AAC right now is how to support individuals who use echolalia or are what we would call Gestalt language processors, or GLPs. So GLP is a really hot topic right now, and we're really learning that I think the typical approach to language development has been more on the analytical side. So if you look at this picture on the slide, there's a little girl who's reading a book with her mom or dad, and mom is reading, then they went to the park, and the little girl says park. And then she expands that and combines words to say play park. And then she goes further as she gets older to say, let's go to the park. So that's kind of the idea of, we learn language in units, and then we learn how that language comes together to have different meaning. So how do we combine those units to create messages? The difference between somebody who's an analytic learner and a Gestalt learner is that Gestalts are learned more as like a whole part. So those individuals kind of learn language in the opposite direction. They learn phrases or word messages as a whole, and then eventually learn to break those down into the individual parts and change the words they're pairing them with to create different meanings. So from the comic here, you can see the Gestalt language processor, the dad says, time for school, and the boy says, let's get ready to rumble, which he probably learned from like a favorite video or show. And so then you can see that as he's progressing with his language, he starts to say, let's get ready to eat. Let's get ready to read. So he's learned that he's still using that carrier phrase that's really meaningful. Let's get ready to, but he's learning to substitute different words at the end and use that language in a different way. And then you can see as he develops further with his language, let's get going to the park. So he's still using some of those phrases, but he's combining them in different ways to create different meaning. And what why this is important in AAC now is most communication systems are really designed for that first group of people, analytic language learners, where different words are on different buttons and we show them how to combine them into sentences. But as we think about Gestalt language learners, we might have to shift our thinking with communication systems to how do we incorporate their Gestalts into their system and then show them how to break those down into the individual units of language so that they can use them more functionally. So this isn't really a hot tech thing, but it's a hot topic right now in AAC. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge. And I think some of the speakers did a really good job today of, especially on the panel, explaining this from their own lived experience rather than having everyone fit into a system that exists and was designed based on, kind of neurotypical language learning. Instead, we have to think about how we redesign our interventions and our tools to match the type of learning that it works best for that individual. So I've included some links where you can learn from ASHA, our professional organization, the speech and language professional organization, about what Gestalt language learning and echolalia are. And then I've also got some trainings that are provided by some of the vendors for communication systems about how their systems how they're trying to incorporate more supports for Gestalt language learners. Okay. The next thing I want to touch on is access method technology, because this is coming, as we know, things are always developing in the tech world, and it seems like every week something new is coming out, and there's some really cool stuff going on right now. One example that I want to touch on is eye gaze cameras. So more companies are creating eye gaze cameras and pairing them with communication systems than ever before. And this is important to know because everyone's eyes respond differently to different cameras. So if you've tried one eye gaze communication system in the past, you've tried one eye gaze communication system. And there are other communication systems that could work better for you if that camera is a better match for the way that your eyes work. Some of these things relate to whether or not you wear glasses, or if you take medications that maybe dry your eyes out or things like that. There are certain cameras that respond better to those kinds of things. So I would just advise, if you've ever tried eye gaze in the past and it wasn't a good fit for you or your family member, but you're interested in trying it again, I would reach back out to a speech language pathologist or the Weissman Center CASC program, because it's always good to keep trying the new technology as it comes out. Similarly, head control is something that's advancing, which seems weird because it seems like now that eye gaze is coming, where it reads your eyes, why would you use something that tracks where your head is moving? But for some individuals, like we said, those who are on medications that dry their eyes out, or whose eye movement is really slow or not as controlled as they would like it to be, some people don't prefer eye gaze. And head control is a nice alternative where if you have pretty good control of your head, you can choose a point that the device can track, and then you can use that as the way you access or activate your communication. In the past, Stasia used a head pointer when she started out with her communication system. And in the past, you had to have something like either a sticker on your body, like a shiny sensor sticker, or something on your glasses or something like that. And she has a really funny story about that I will encourage her to tell later if she feels like it. But it was kind of like, if you didn't have your sticker on, you couldn't use your communication system, where now they're designing them in a way that you can teach the camera a point on your face. So maybe it's your nose, maybe it's a point on your cheek, maybe if you have light skin and dark eyebrows, maybe it's part of your eyebrow. So you train the device to watch a part of your face without having to have that sticky dot. And so it creates more successful and more consistent access to your communication system. And then the last one on here, which is really cool, is the NeuroNode EMG and spatial sensor. It's the one that's pictured here. So the Control Bionics communication device is pictured, and then this little gadget that looks like a watch is the NeuroNode. And what that NeuroNode does is it senses either muscle impulses if it's set to EMG, or it senses really tiny movements if it's set to spatial. So if you think about an individual who has a complex body and their motor movements don't always do what they want them to, it can be really hard to position a switch, because if I have If I have a switch on my wheelchair tray and I'm reaching forward to hit that switch, but then my arm gets stuck behind the armrest of my wheelchair, I suddenly can't get my arm forward to hit my switch. And now not only am I in an uncomfortable position, but I can't even communicate about it to tell somebody. Other examples are people with like SMA or ALS or some of those diagnoses where their motor skills become less and less and less over time. They may only have really minute movements that aren't big enough to activate a traditional switch. What this neuronode does is, for example, if I can twitch even a little bit with my middle finger, the muscle that's making that twitch comes all the way down through my wrist uh, here. And so when I move my finger, there's a spot on my wrist that's also actually moving, or the muscle is firing. And so if you place the sensor there, if I can do, no matter how big or little that movement is, if I can move it enough, if I can move it a tiny bit, the sensor will pick up that muscle impulse and it will activate the communication system. Similarly, the spatial one, let's say I can move my arm, but I can't always move it in the same direction. Sometimes I can tip it, sometimes I can lift it up, sometimes I can slide it forward and backward. If you have the spatial sensor turned on, it doesn't matter where you move. The sensor maps like, okay, at baseline, your wrist is sitting here. And then if your wrist moves in any direction, up, down, forward, backwards, it will activate that sensor. And you can adjust the sensitivity of the sensor. So if you have a bigger movement, let's say due to tone or muscle control, when you try to move your arm, your arm moves really far. You can set it up to say, only when I move this far is it purposeful. Or if you have really tiny movements, you can make it very sensitive so that even a tiny movement will activate the communication system. So this is some really cool technology that's doing awesome things. One thing I didn't include on this slide because it's not quite like fully cooked yet is brain computer interface, but that is something that's really being investigated and researched. There's a lot of work being done to figure out, are there ways that we could take a sensor similar to this EMG sensor and have it sense brain activity in a way that would help someone control a communication device. When I say that, I want to make sure we know that this brain computer interface at this time would not be like a ticker tape where like you just think something and it types out what you're thinking. It would be more like, if I think up, the device moves the mouse up. If I think right, the device moves the mouse right. And then I can get to the button that I want to activate. That's more the level that it's at right now. It would be, I mean, very cool if someday it was like a ticker tape. But so brain computer interface is something that I didn't put in the PowerPoint because it's not yet really available for use for individuals who are using AAC, but it is something that's being researched. And then along with that, artificial intelligence is also being really investigated for how it could help support individuals using communication systems. One example of an idea or a way that they're looking at this is, could artificial intelligence help with the kinds of messages that generate on your computer? So if I drive my wheelchair into a Starbucks and it can sense, or it, based on location, it knows I'm in a Starbucks, could it auto-populate messages about what I might want to order, social messages I might say to my friends while I'm there, questions I might ask to find out where the bathroom is or how I can get to certain things? And then same thing, if I drove my chair into a grocery store, it would auto-populate messages that might be relevant in a grocery store. So those are some of the ideas that people are thinking about in terms of how AI and current technology could help with making communication systems more effective and more efficient. Okay, and then I think this is my last bit, and then I'll turn it over to Stasia. Speech recognition advances have been really cool, and there's a lot of work being done in this area. So as you know, most of us have a device that we can talk into and we tell it what we want it to do and it will do it. You can say, what's the weather? Play this music for me, turn my lights on and off. So we know that there's technology in those areas. What's tricky about that is that if you don't have standard speech, if your speech comes out either with dysarthria, so the articulation isn't very precise, or other kinds of articulation differences, those systems don't always understand you as well as they might understand a typical speech pattern. So there are two groups that are working on creating opportunities for speech recognition that is taught to understand non-standard speech. So Voice It is one example, and it's accessed through a website, so it works on any technology. You can use it on Apple or Android or Windows-based computers, tablets, and phones. And the website is here. So with Voice It, you teach it how to understand your speech. So you go in and you record, I think it's 200 different short phrases. So it can take a few hours to a few days to train it. But once you've taught it how to understand your speech, it will act as sort of a translator or a communication partner. If you think about if you can be understood by your family, but not by other people who are less familiar with you, this app is a great fit for you because it will learn how you speak. And then your options are if you're live talking to someone, you can speak into it and it will repeat what you said using the computerized voice, so that hopefully your partner can understand that computerized voice. You can also use it for live captioning. So on a meeting like the one we're on right now, you could have Voice It running on the side of the screen and everything I'm saying would be typed out as I'm saying it. And you can use it for dictation. So if I was writing an email, I could talk into it using my non-standard speech. It would type out what I said, and then I could copy that message into an email or onto a social media post or wherever else you might be thinking of using it. Similarly, Google has a project going on right now related to this. It's called Project Relate. It's only available in the Google Play Store, which means it's only available on Android right now. I think ultimately their goal will be to work with other platforms, but it's still kind of in the development stages. The website is here, so if you're somebody who speaks but has kind of non-standard speech patterns and you're interested in helping them with their research, you can certainly go on their website and learn more. It will be similar to Voice It in the sense that you can talk into it and have it repeat what you say. You can have it transcribe what you're saying or live caption what you're saying. And then it also will, it will have a built-in control for like Siri and Hey Google and those voice activated assistants. So there'll be a place where you can talk into it for what you want and it will say, Hey Siri, do this. So it's pretty cool. Some cool technology that's coming out in terms of helping make communication more effective. Oh, I did have one more slide. Oh, my phone heard me. I knew I said it one too many times. Okay. So the only other plug I want to put in, and this isn't necessarily a hot topic or a new technology thing, but I think it's so important that we always consider literacy development for individuals who are using AAC. If you think about kind of the most independent communicators, if you can spell and write what you're thinking, nothing can stop you from communicating what you want to communicate, right? So being literate and being able to spell and write out what you think is the pathway to the most independent communication that any individual can achieve. So I put some resources in here. I think it's important, traditional literacy development and learning often focuses on how do you make the sounds? What sounds does each letter associate with? When letters are put together, how do those sounds change? And how do you sound them out to figure out what the word is? And so it feels really different and unnatural, I guess, from that literacy teaching, that kind of traditional or standard literacy approach for someone who's not speaking and not making the sounds and sounding it out. So there's a lot of research being done. There has been a lot of research for years, but there are a lot of resources and continued research being done about how do we best teach individuals who aren't speaking how to read and how to effectively use reading and writing for communication. So I've included this book, Comprehensive Literacy for All by Karen Erickson and David Koppenhaver, is a great resource. And then Penn State has the RERC on AAC is a federal grant that focuses on research in AAC, and they have a lot of work being done about literacy. And then a resource for individuals who are using eye gaze or alternative access for communication, accessible literacy learning, or ALL, is a program by Toby Dynavox that you can access via a communication device. So you can access it through eye gaze or through whatever access strategy you're using. And so it's a great way to have individuals who are using communication systems get hands-on experience with literacy. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Stasia and let her talk to you guys a little bit more about her own lived experiences as an AAC user and how these kinds of tools and technology have helped her over the years.
Hello, I am Anastasia Wilson. As you can see, I am speaking through a communication device. Many of us call ourselves AAC users. because we use augmentative and alternative communication. Let me tell you about how I started my long journey to accept my augmented and alternative device as my voice. When I was a young child and couldn't talk, I would act out and bite people, including myself. I remember my dad telling me I needed to be nice to people to receive help. My parents were worried, and they took me to a pediatrician who recommended getting me a mad doll that I could bite and hit whenever I was angry. After I beat up the doll, I would love and comfort it. Getting the ability to communicate my wants and needs helped lower my frustration level. The biting slowed once I received a communication device and learned to channel my anger into that mad doll. My parents helped me to accept my disabilities with grace so I would be as independent as possible. My parents assisted me to create signs to communicate more efficiently. My grade school aides also helped in this process. One of my first aides in grade school taught me to blink my eyes for the bathroom. I innovate my signs and gestures to fit the situation. I will still blink my eyes for the bathroom with my family, but since my current aides don't know what that means, I will look toward the bathroom door. My signs and gestures are helpful when I'm not near my device. It was a life-changing event the day that I received my first communication device. Oh, I was too young to remember this, but my mother likes to tell this funny story about the initial consultation for my first communication device. She says, I wasn't very happy that day. Then, the sales representative for the ceramic company said, Stasia, I know you are frustrated, but if you let me show you something, I will teach you how to tell us all to jump into a lake. I have that saying in my communication device for many years. My first occupational therapist discovered I had the most control over my neck and head. Therefore, I always had some optical head pointer or head stick to select the buttons. I feel lucky that my grade school helped me to access communication because my communication device assisted with expanding my mind. It allowed me to play around with language and ask questions. Also, my augmented machine allowed me to do homework more independently. It provides me with a method to write without feeling pressure if I need time to figure out the spelling of specific words. Since I have dyslexia, icons are quicker to understand than written words. The Unity program on my communication device is my first language, and that is translated into English. This impacts how I write and view the world. The Inuit people in Alaska have over 50 words for snow, while Americans have only one. Their vocabulary affects how they think about snow differently than us. A similar phenomenon happens to people who use AAC. Our icons influence how we form our vocabulary and how we think about the world. As an adult, I'm so appreciative of this machine that gave me my voice that I painted all 144 icons on my screen, which uses the Unity program for the pics. By creating this piece, I will introduce the broader public to the world of AAC. I wanted to create an exhibition illustrating our picture language's uniqueness and richness. I wanted to show other people who use AAC that they aren't alone, and to provide some support on their journey to accept their augmented voice. People can take many years to truly accept their communication device as their voice. As a teenager, I felt more comfortable doing my homework with my device than actually talking with it. I thought people should guess what I was trying to say by my gestures and what I was looking at. I used to roll around in my high school halls with my sound off, and my Aiden friends had to read what I wrote. I didn't realize everyone felt like a weirdo at that age. I thought the augmented voice would draw unwanted attention to me. In my whole school, I was the only one who was a successful communicator with AAC. It was isolating. At my lowest point, I wondered why they made an entire machine if I was the only one. Of course, I realized this thought was ridiculous, but still, I wondered when I would meet someone who communicated like me and with the same intelligence. When I met somebody else who was a successful AAC communicator with the same level of intellect, I felt an enormous weight lifted from my shoulders. I wasn't alone anymore. I wanted to know everything about him, how he was living independently and attending college. Talking to him with my communication device felt natural because he had augmented communication too. My life changed when I attended his Authentic Voices of America, a camp for young adults with communication devices. I felt a sense of community and belonging when I saw a group of teenagers talking with their AAC devices. A light bulb went on over my head. I completely understood what my speech-language pathologist always told me. My communication device is my voice. In high school, my situation got worse. DVR misdiagnosed me with a cognitive disability. They gave me a standardized test to come to this wrong conclusion. I almost believed them because there was a kernel of truth. I have some learning disabilities. I struggle with reading, print, and with math. Back then, no one realized I had dyslexia and dyscalculia. Many people who use AAC have reading challenges because we can't physically sound out words. Also, with cerebral palsy, my spastic movements make the print look like it's bouncing. As you may know, learning disabilities are neurological issues. With this disability, the brain is wired differently for learning. Students with learning disabilities are just as smart or more intelligent than their classmates. Some well-known people had learning disabilities, including Walt Disney and Whoopi Goldberg. Even Einstein could not read until he was 9, and his teacher kicked him out of school. We need support to process the information that the professor is teaching. With the correct help, people with learning disabilities can be very successful in school and go on to have distinguished careers. Standardized tests might have their place with students without disabilities if used correctly. However, there is some debate on whether standardized tests are appropriate tools for people with disabilities, because standardized tests compare students with disabilities with typically developing students, and they don't have the same limitations. Plus, standardized tests are dangerous if people decide a student's future, because these tests show only a slice of an individual's knowledge. The other side of the coin is tests are supposed to be designed to illustrate what extra supports children need. Standardized tests shouldn't shame people, like I experienced. DVR's wrong interpretation of the test results turned my world upside down. Based on the test results, my high school pulled me entirely out of mainstream classes. I had a couple of very rough years. I fell into a deep depression. A couple of times, I was on the top floor of my high school, looking down the stairs, thinking if I drove a few more feet, all of my troubles would be over. Luckily, I returned to reality. I realized I was too important to end it that way. Besides, I couldn't let them win. There is nothing wrong with having a cognitive disability. I discovered that most people with a cognitive disability are very caring and funny. They can be geniuses in sports or the arts and making friends. The issue with the DVR giving me the label of a cognitive disability was simply that we need different supports to be successful. When my mom developed a plan to get me into college, I thought she had completely lost her mind, but I knew I was more intelligent than they thought. Plus, I wanted to mess with my teacher's minds. Therefore, I worked very hard at my long-distance college courses and studied for my SAT so that UW-Whitewater would accept me as a transfer student. Then, the high school finally saw the light, and they started to put me back into some mainstream classes again. Those days were very tiring and frustrating. It was all worth getting accepted into UW-Whitewater to shed the wrong label. Besides, it was always my dream to go away to college to study art. College was among the hardest and the most fun things I ever did. With a lot of hard work, I graduated with honors. I will never forget that deep voice calling me on stage, saying, "Anastasia Wilson, cum laude." I tell you my story because it is easy to underestimate children who use AAC. People could be asking questions in such a way that the child can't show their knowledge. If you see a similar situation, please speak up for them. This experience taught me that students with challenges could be very successful with the proper tools. Einstein's quote sums it all up. He said, "Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid." It is essential to have high expectations of children with disabilities because often kids don't realize their potential if they have no one to push them. Every successful positive perspective change toward people with disabilities builds on top of each other. I hope I illustrated people can accomplish big achievements and it does not matter how severe the disabilities are. Thanks for listening to us. Now, I am going to answer your questions using my sequences of icons. It could take a couple of minutes. Please have patience.
So, Stasia, I've known you for a few years, and I think this is the first time I've heard like different parts of the story. Thank you so much. It just phenomenal. So please feel free to Abby, I think you can go ahead and stop sharing, and then we can go back to a more gallery view. But I would encourage people to go ahead and put your questions into the chat box. Feel free to unmute so that we can see or hear you. I have the participant list up that should let me know if you are raising your hand. We haven't had a problem yet with people stepping on each other with questions. So you are also very free. I feel like I feel like I'm now around 98 of my closest friends. So feel free to unmute and just go ahead and ask your question if you have a question or a comment.
Yeah. Real quick, I wanted to just go back to the slide too.
Yes.
Sasha's running a peer mentor program for individuals who use AAC. And so on the slides, I'll put the link to the slides in the chat one more time too. But if you go to this second to last slide, Stasha's contact information is here too. So if you have somebody who if you or your family member or a client you're working with is using AAC and doesn't have that connection with others who are using AAC, similar to what Stasia described at the beginning of her talk, she is happy to be that peer mentor to individuals. And I know that Mike Hipple has also done a lot of support in this area. And so the link to the Wisconsin AAC network is here as well. And I know Mike shared it earlier and he shared his email earlier. So I think that can be one of the biggest, most important things for an individual, especially somebody just starting out with using AAC, is knowing that you're not alone and that your communication strategy may look different than a lot of people's, but it doesn't look different than everybody's. And so having people you can connect with who have that shared lived experience is really important. So I'll put that link in the chat again to our slides. And then also, please, yes, do jump in with any questions or discussion.
I want to just quickly say, Stasia, first of all, you did a great job. And I'm going to say something here. I've already written it briefly in the chat, and do not take this as a criticism by any means. As someone who is verbal but has memories of having communication issues, I say this not to criticize, but just to remind everyone that oftentimes the needs of verbal people with disabilities can be different than those who are nonverbal. And in fact, I have to thank all my friends who are nonverbal to remind me of this. And I'll never forget, Stasia, when I actually was a guest at a social group similar to that camp you mentioned, where it was so that I could learn about what their needs were and they could learn about what my needs, the verbal person with a disability, was. And one of the things that I want to remind everyone is that for people with verbal issues, I have learned, yes, high expectations and presuming competence is very important. But I want to remind everyone that those same high expectations and presumed competence have in fact been very harmful for those who are verbal with disabilities, because what happens is for the verbal, the expectations for us are too high for functioning, and we are often kicked out of many employment and social settings because people expect too much for us. And that presumption of competence that may be essential when you can't talk often means the same discrimination that you probably were trying to tell people not to engage in. So I'm just saying, when you're working with those who are verbal, be aware that those terms to them mean the opposite of probably what you were intending to say. Because I don't think when you said presumed competence, you were telling people to discriminate against disabled people. So thank you.
Thank you, James. Mike, if you'd like to go ahead.
Glad. Someone. Something. I agree.
Yeah, I
We-
think that's really. Oh, sorry, Mike. Keep going.
J. O. Judge. People. So. Much. I. Wanted. To be. In. A.
Right on. No. Still on your meeting? Ah.
Bowling. Group. Two. Four. Special Olympics. But they told my parents and my friend. Friends. Parent. Parents. Because we have A, B, Y, pygmy, you, physical therapist. Disability. A, we couldn't. B, A, part of this. I agree. We judge people so much. I wanted to be in a bowling group for Special Olympics, but they told my parents and my friends' parents, because we have a physical disability, we couldn't be a part of this.
That's really frustrating, Mike, and really discouraging to feel like you couldn't access or participate in something you wanted to, and there wasn't thinking about, rather than saying, nope, you just can't do it. Trying to think about how can we have everyone be able to do it.
We do have another question that Abby has been working her way through in the chat about any resources share about common ways that children or adults for that matter express their frustration with communication difficulties. She thought maybe some individuals with lived experience might be able to address that, as well as families who have seen that in their own kids. So what are ways that people express that they are having trouble communicating?
I think the most important thing, honestly, and I will just say this quickly, is that we have to remember that many times the meltdown is often a form of communication where the person feels like they have to melt down in order to get listened to.
Bingo.
I think that's really important, James, that fact that you bring up, like sometimes you feel like you have no other choice in order to be heard or be listened to. And I think related to that for individuals, I think I don't love the term like challenging behavior, but
Right.
that idea that someone might use behavior as a way to communicate. We all use behavior to communicate. And if you're an individual who doesn't have access to language to explain what's going on with you, that might be the only effective way you have to communicate what's happening. And I think the other piece that's really important to keep in mind is that even when somebody who is using behavior as a primary means of getting across their needs has access to a communication system later, it can be really hard to change that communication strategy, right? Like we all form habits and we all form ways that we know are effective to communicate. And so if a person is having a meltdown as something's going on, and that's a really effective way to get people's attention and get them to help adjust whatever situation is leading to that, it can be hard to shift from using that as the way we communicate that need to then switching over to using a communication system or a device or words. So I think we all also have to be really patient and kind and understanding and non-judgmental about, even as somebody has access to a language system or a communication system, it may not be like a switch that just switch changes and all of a sudden they're communicating everything that way. We have to be helpful and supportive of how we make those shifts and how we learn how to use language for those kinds of things.
One of the things I've learned over the years.
Abygail was my
Yeah, I
first
get so
communication
frustrated,
system.
I'm having to cry.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we heard Mike and Stasia at the same time, so now we have people communicating over each other. Mike, do you want to go ahead?
Bingo. Abygail was my first communication system.
Cool. Stasia?
Yeah, I get so frustrated, I can to cry.
Yeah, and as a parent, is one of the things that I think about is the people that annoy me the most, that disrespect and disregard my child, it seems are the ones that don't have enough time to learn, or that they don't want to learn. And so I've had to make these decisions in my life where is it somebody that I'm going to have this ongoing relationship with, like a teacher or a doctor or someone that I need them to stop their behavior of not allowing my child to communicate. Like if my child's taking a little too long to process their thoughts or to get their thoughts going. If it's somebody that's going to be in an ongoing relationship, then yes, I want to step in and I want to teach them that communication could take time, that this isn't going to be hurried, that if you really care about what this person is saying, if you care about that person, then you need to take the time to listen and to engage. There's other people that maybe in the grocery store, maybe I just want to hand them a card and it doesn't say what I want it to say, but it may say something like, thank you for understanding my child has a neurodiversity that sometimes causes them to take longer to communicate, or they stare off into space, or whatever it may be that you want to use, or your child would like to use, communicate their whatever is happening. So if it makes you feel better, just that you could give it to them, let them go on. Maybe you've done a little bit of education. But there are also people that I've come across that I just literally choose to ignore, that they don't show the common respect to me or my child to take the time for us to answer that question, or to really answer that question. And if they don't really care, then you know, it's out of there. I will, one of my cards is from Dr. Seuss: be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. It's those people that care about us that will have an effect in our life that I want to understand. The rest of them, I don't have time. Aaron, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I gotta say, the only sign you've ever seen to me is when I'm inspirational and amazing. The other times I'm staying in my house, and the older I get, I'm really worried what happens when they see that I'm not amazing, and the days when I'm not a brilliant. I kind of wonder if people with significant disabilities, I wonder that if I'll be in your shoes one day, if I'll be abused, if I'll be beaten down by the police, it's my ability is really varies. I mean, it can be sort of like I make plans one day and then whoops, you can't do that today. It's not the same thing, but it's still really disabling.
Yes, the expectation to be constantly on is sometimes really frustrating. And I need those spaces where I'm not on, where I just don't feel like being perfect, where I get to jumble my words. I don't get to be professional. Maybe I don't have to wear a friggin' collared shirt. We all need those spaces. We cannot be on 100% of the time. And to think that somebody who is struggling to navigate in a world that is not designed for them is going to every day be sunshine and roses and marshmallows is just ridiculous. It's a ridiculous expectation. And we need to do what we can to allow people the space to be human. If we could just allow each other space to be human, I think we'd have a lot better world going on out there.
I think of the fact, sorry,
Go ahead.
when I went through the process of applying for disability benefits and won them, the people who evaluated me said that I was eligible for those benefits not because of laziness, not because I was dumb or stupid, but because I had needs that made me unable to meet the standards and the rubric of conventional workplaces. And oftentimes we have to remember it is the external standards and expectations of the world around us that can disable us, not necessarily our disabilities themselves.
Well said, James. Really well said. Yeah. I think what I'm thinking about is kind of going back to some of the questions in the chat, but I think it could relate a little bit to what you're saying too, James. There's a question related to the question that we started talking about with Mary about resources for people to understand how children or adults express their frustration. But then also there's a question about when my daughter struggles to communicate, people often seem impatient, uncomfortable, might lose interest and talk to someone else or walk away. She's had people hang up on her on the phone. Just wondering if you have any recommendations for her on how she could cope, or ways you found to cope. I think this is important, and it relates to what you're saying, James, too. Like, we shouldn't always have to, individuals who communicate in different ways shouldn't always have to conform to the ways that, you know, typical society communicates. But sometimes those tools can be important to have to kind of get your foot in the door. And so Kristen responded to that second question saying, could you use a common introductory phrase or have a card that they show a communication partner that says, I need more time to communicate, please be patient with me. And I think this is a really important thing to have on communication systems is our self-advocacy buttons that do help. We can help teach the individual to say, I need more time. I need you to be patient. I'm using a computer to talk. It may take me longer to compose my message. And I also think about a tool that I think both Mary and Carrie might consider for their kids. Sometimes we design what's called a communication dictionary. And again, this is that this is going in the realm of conforming your communication to fit. I mean, it's hopefully helping overcome that conform piece. But the idea is that you create just a chart that says when my child does this, they're communicating this. When this happens, it may indicate this. And so it's kind of giving people a map to understand what we would, those communication strategies that are non-traditional, or kind of not what society or typical communicators are expecting. So I wonder for your kids, if you created a tool like that where it said when so-and-so is yelling or making these sounds, they're very happy and they're excited. It's not a bad thing. Or when, they're putting their head down or doing these things, that means they're frustrated, and here's what you can do to help them. So it's almost I wish people had this about me sometimes, like it's a roadmap to understand if I'm using other ways to communicate, this is what it can indicate. So hopefully that could be a helpful tool for both Mary and Carrie, thinking about your kids' communication and helping other people, putting some of the onus on the other people to learn how they communicate and accept those forms of communication and know what they mean.
So we have a couple of questions that hopefully we can get to before we end the day. One, if someone would care to speak about the possibility of fatigue in communication as an AAC or a non-AAC user, and then what can people do to be more supportive?
For the phone, I say hello, I am Anastasia Wilson, and I am speaking through communication device. Please have patience.
Give me grace. Just don't assume that I'm being obnoxious. Just that would just take off so much.
Stasia, this question that's in here, that Tim just read, I'm wondering if you maybe wouldn't mind speaking to this a little bit, because I know that you also have dyslexia. So information coming to you verbally and through writing can be sometimes processing that. You use different strategies and tools. Can you talk a little bit about that, about things that help you process and things that help when you're fatigued or when you're tired, or how you receive written communication and how you receive verbal communication? And if others have things they want to talk about too, Stasia's always really good about composing her message and taking time. So if other self-advocates or those with lived experience have things to add, Stasia, is that okay if they speak in the middle too? Okay, cool. Thanks.
For email, and other, D, O, document, documents, I have, a, computer, program, that, reads, stuff, to, me. For email and other documents, I have a computer program that reads stuff to me. I. Learned. Learn. The. Best. Just. By. Hearing. Listening. I learned the best just by listening.
Well, we are getting to be at the end of our time. Mike, if you wanted to have any final comments, we would be very interested in hearing those, as well as from Stasia, James. But I'm hoping, Abby, that you might be able to help with the question about AAC, a student who uses AAC in outpatient therapy, but her school is reluctant to have that instituted. Have you come across that, or how maybe you could have, offer a pathway maybe?
Yeah, yep. I'm so glad that you said that, Mike, because I was just trying to type an answer and feeling like I could be typing for days. So this is really helpful. I do experience that a lot. So part of my role, I work in an outpatient clinic, so I'm on the side of the SLP that is using the AAC system for my typical work with clients. But then I also have a role in our outreach program where we go out into homes and schools and we provide consult and training to individuals on how to implement AAC systems. So that program is not focused on direct services with the person who's using the communication system. It's focused on the people around them and helping family members and school staff and those other individuals know how to use the system and how to support that communication. And unfortunately, that type of support is very missing across our state and every state. I think there's kind of a lack of, there's tons of research that shows that a huge barrier to using augmentative communication is not having partners around you who have had the opportunity to learn about and understand that communication system. And unfortunately, even though there's lots of research for that, there's not a lot of funding for it. But to answer this question specifically, what I have found going into schools, often reticence to use a system isn't actually that they don't think that that system is a good fit or that they don't think that that child is capable of using the system. Often it stems from a place of that lack of training and lack of knowledge about the communication system and from a place of fear. So we expect these people in schools to be, to meet every kid's need. You have to know how to help. If we take the speech language pathologist as an example, you have to know how to help the kid who isn't eating in a traditional way and needs feeding therapy. You have to know how to help the kid who can't say their R's and you're teaching them how to produce a sound with their mouth. And you have to know how to help the kids that are using augmentative communication devices. And you might have 3 or 4 kids in your class or on your caseload who all use very different communication systems. So you're learning a whole bunch of different languages. And so my thought would be trying to figure out ways to create space for those teachers to get education on the communication system that your child's using. The ways that could look are like opening up the IEP and asking for minutes to be put into the IEP for staff training. Sometimes in like the supplemental services area of an IEP, there can be additions that say like everybody gets an hour a semester to have some training on the communication device. And an hour a semester isn't a ton, but anything helps, right? Like if you could get it every month, if you could get it, that would be amazing. But I think communicating with the team and saying, this is her communication strategy, and we are moving forward with this being a way that she communicates across all environments. And we need help figuring out how that can happen as effectively as possible in school. And then individuals that could help provide that kind of training. Our program, unfortunately, is only in Dane County. So if you're in Dane County, our program could potentially help with that. If you're not in Dane County, sometimes the vendor for the communication device can provide that kind of training. So, whatever communication system you have, if you look up on the website for that company, you can often like find my consultant or find my representative and type in your zip code, and it will send you contact information for that person. And they could potentially come to the school to provide some of that training.
I
We've
have
also
a question for the mother who asked how to work with a school. Please contact me and where they are located. And
I love it. So Robin, if you can also email Mike, he would like to get involved. The AAC network, I think, does a lot of support with advocacy too. So if
no,
you email me, and then Mike, you asked where are they
no.
located, right? I think if you're not comfortable sharing that with the whole group, you can certainly just share that with Mike when you contact him too.
We have a Ray. Program. Called. Forward.
This is Barbara's husband, Dick. She wasn't feeling well, so she went to lay down.
Assistive technology. That is state. W. A. Y. Way to. Statewide. That.
Mike, while you're finishing your message, is it okay if I just add one more resource for training for school teams? Or one more idea? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So the only other thing I was going to say for that training piece is if you can't get access to a real person coming to your school to do the training, so whether that's like a program like ours or the vendor for the communication system, another strategy that I've had schools use is doing some of the online trainings that are available for the communication system, but not stopping there. Because often if it's like, hey, everybody watch this training, like they either don't do it or they do it, but it's hard to synthesize the information. So I've had some schools where they create like a monthly kind of discussion with the staff that are working with that student. And each time they watch a training from the vendor website, and then they all come together and talk about what did we learn? How are we going to implement it with this student? Where are we going to start? And so sometimes that can be a helpful way to implement training for a school team, especially if you don't have access to a lot of in-person resources. Because those online trainings are really nice and helpful, but without any kind of follow-up and discussion, they can be really nebulous and hard to think about how they actually get implemented. So that can be another really good strategy.
Thanks, Abby. Mike, you're gonna ask you to, if you're ready to go ahead and unmute. If you're not ready to go, try to let us know. James, do you have any, well, where Mike's unmuting, do you have any final comments, James?
Honestly, at this point, out of respect for time, I have said all that I think at this point needs to be said. Sorry, I realized I was muted. I think
I have a question for the mother who asked how to work with a school. Please contact me and where they are located, and know that we have a great program called Forward Assistive Technology that is statewide to educate them what is assistive technology and how to work.
Fantastic. So please go ahead. I believe Mike has his email from previous. If not, reach out to me. We'll get it. I know we're over time, so we're going to call an end to this fun fest that we have. I would be very neglectful if I didn't thank all of our speakers, our panelists. Fantastic time. I'd be neglectful if I didn't that there was a team that planned this and was behind the moving force behind that. So thank you, planning team. We hope you all join us in the spring when we hope to have another gathering. Thank you all very much. Fantastic time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.